What happened to Keith Bynum has left fans heartbroken and in tears. The star of Bargain Block, known for turning broken houses into beautiful homes, is now facing pain no one saw coming. Supporters who once cheered his success are now holding him close with love, prayers, and hope as he bravely shares his deepest struggles. Join us as we uncover the heartbreaking moment that brought fans to tears. The moment that broke everyone. The moment people learned that Bargain Block would no longer return to HGTV, the internet exploded with emotions. Viewers who had followed Keith and Evan from the very beginning felt crushed. For them, Bargain Block wasn't just another home renovation show. It carried purpose, heart, and a message that set it apart. Unlike programs that focused on luxury homes in glamorous cities, Keith and Evan dedicated themselves to restoring abandoned houses in Detroit, turning broken-down spaces into beautiful homes with passion, imagination, and a genuine love for the community. So when the news of its cancellation spread, fans didn't take it lightly. Instead of moving on, they grew angry and furious. Many made their feelings clear by declaring they were done with HGTV altogether. Across social platforms, fan pages, and comment threads, people kept saying the same thing. Without Bargain Block, there was no reason to tune in. The loyalty toward Keith and Evan was fierce, and the frustration only kept building. Keith saw all of it, and rather than let things spiral, he chose to respond. He poured his feelings into a heartfelt message on Instagram, gently explaining the truth behind the situation. While HGTV had been the network that gave them their start, the final decision wasn't entirely in their hands. Producers behind the scenes had a heavy influence on why the show ended, and both he and Evan had very little control over it. He encouraged everyone to stay kind and keep their spirits high, reminding them that their journey wasn't over yet. Then came the part that lifted fans out of their sadness. Keith revealed that new conversations were already happening with fresh producers who were interested in continuing the show. Even though nothing official had been locked in, the possibility of Bargain Block returning, just on a different platform, suddenly felt real. Names like Netflix and Magnolia quickly surfaced as strong possibilities, and the thought of the show moving to a place with more creative freedom sparked new excitement. That tiny spark grew fast. Supporters rushed to comment, promising that they didn't care where the show aired. What mattered to them was Keith and Evan themselves, and they were ready to follow them to any network. The outpouring of love only grew louder, and it touched Keith deeply. In another video shared online, his emotions showed clearly as he thanked everyone. His voice carried the weight of how much the support meant, and it was obvious that both he and Evan felt encouraged again. Every message, every comment, every show of loyalty became a powerful reminder that their story was far from over. As someone who has always given his whole heart to fixing broken homes and lifting up forgotten neighborhoods, it was a touching moment that revealed just how much Keith had been carrying quietly all along. Bargain Block was never only about paint, wood, or floor plans. It was about breathing life into stories, bringing hope to families, and showing that love and creativity could change entire streets. At the center of it all were Keith Bynum and Evan Thomas, the true soul of the project, whose vision made the show feel alive. That kind of honesty and passion doesn't fade away, it literally grows into something new. The HGTV journey may be ending, but another door is already opening. With the kind of devotion their supporters have shown, it's clear that no matter where Keith and Evan land, the people who believe in them will follow closely. A new chapter is waiting, and it carries the promise of being even more powerful and uplifting than anything seen before. Speaking of a new chapter, you might be wondering why the viewers were so eager to start all over again with them. So, to answer the questions in your mind, let's get a little background story of how it all started with the couple, Keith and Evan. When love stirred up a new dream.
I think what I'm loving is this return to very traditional styling. Yeah, very much. I think it's because I'm finding familiarity.
Back in 2013, two men living in Colorado were unknowingly heading toward a life-changing meeting. Keith Bynum, originally from Texas, had already made a name for himself in home design. He built a thriving business that grew into 3 successful stores, eventually selling it when he was ready for something new. With an MBA focused on entrepreneurship, He combined sharp business skills with a natural flair for creativity, giving him the rare ability to dream boldly and still think strategically. Evan Thomas, meanwhile, was following a very different road. Growing up in South Dakota, he had gone deep into academics and was working toward a PhD in physics at the University of Colorado Boulder. His days revolved around research, formulas, and solving complex problems. Home design wasn't part of his professional world at all, but his logical way of thinking would later prove to be the perfect balance to Keith's artistic spark. Their paths finally crossed on Match.com, where Keith noticed Evan almost instantly. To him, Evan seemed like the only person on the site who truly felt like a kindred spirit. From the very first messages, there was not only romantic chemistry but also a shared creative energy that stood out. Keith quickly realized Evan's grounded, problem-solving mindset could help anchor his big, imaginative ideas, while Evan discovered that Keith's vision opened up possibilities far beyond the structure of academics. When they met face-to-face, the connection grew stronger. What began as conversations about their lives soon turned into dreaming together about projects they could take on. They both enjoyed design, renovation, and the excitement of transforming something ordinary into something extraordinary. Their early efforts were small but meaningful, repainting rooms, giving tired furniture a fresh look, or reworking cramped spaces into something more livable. Keith would come up with daring sketches and bold plans, while Evan worked out the details, tools, and measurements that made them possible. This teamwork quickly became second nature. They spent weekends exploring thrift shops, estate sales, and salvage yards, searching for forgotten treasures that they could bring back to life. Each find was another chance to blend Keith's imagination with Evan's practicality, creating a rhythm that felt as natural as it was inspiring. One of their earliest finds was a worn-out dining table they bought for less than $50. With fresh stain and careful detailing, they brought it back to life and turned it into the centerpiece of a client's home. Another time, they rescued an old light fixture abandoned in a dusty corner. Evan patiently rewired it, and Keith gave its frame a bold new design, transforming it into a piece that immediately caught everyone's attention. Friends quickly began noticing their gift for turning the ordinary into something extraordinary. Soon, requests came pouring in from people who wanted their own spaces refreshed. What started as favors for friends slowly became a training ground for bigger dreams. Little by little, Keith and Evan shifted from hobbyists into two people questioning if this love for design and renovation could truly become their full-time life. Yet there were obstacles. Colorado's property prices kept climbing, and finding affordable houses to transform became harder with each passing year. The market felt too crowded, and growth seemed limited. They often talked about leaving for a place where they could do more, but the exact destination never felt clear. Then one night, everything changed. Keith was scrolling through Instagram when he came across a story that stopped him cold. A house flipper in Detroit had bought 10 rundown properties and managed to turn them into more than $1 million in profit. The pictures were breathtaking. Homes once falling apart were now colorful, vibrant, and ready for families again. Compared to Colorado, the cost of buying in Detroit was shockingly low. For Keith, the idea wasn't just about money. He saw the chance to play a part in bringing life back to a city that had endured so much. It was about showing that affordable homes could also be stylish and filled with character. When he shared the discovery with Evan, their casual conversations turned into serious late-night planning. The thought of leaving everything behind in Colorado was intimidating, but the opportunity was too powerful to ignore. Detroit meant risk, but it also meant possibility, the kind that only comes once in a lifetime. And so began the conversations that would soon push them toward a bold decision, uprooting their lives to chase something far bigger than they had ever imagined. The question was how they would make such a daring leap and what they would uncover when they finally stepped into a city filled with both struggles and hope. From first flip to full-time dream, Keith Bynum couldn't get the thought of Detroit out of his head after seeing that Instagram story. The photos of rundown houses transformed into bright, livable homes kept replaying in his mind. What amazed him most wasn't just the stunning makeovers, but the fact that in Detroit, entire houses could be bought for the price of a second-hand car. In Colorado, getting started meant a huge investment, but here the barrier was so much lower. The story of someone turning 10 properties into over $1 million felt less like a dream and more like an invitation to try. Keith wondered if he and Evan could take that same path and make it their own. On his 30th birthday, he decided to stop wondering. He bought a ticket to Detroit, determined to see things for himself. The trip was supposed to be simple: walk through the neighborhoods, look at the homes, and decide if this was worth pursuing. What he discovered went far beyond anything he had imagined. In just a few days, he visited a dozen houses. Some were so damaged that walking through the front door felt unsafe.
Is that from the Wizard of Oz?
I mean, I've seen you work wonders on homes.
From sinking floors to collapsing ceilings, you could sense that it has been neglected for years. Yet, under all that decay, Keith saw a possibility. The challenge didn't scare him, it fueled him. One little house in particular caught his eye. The asking price was only $12,000. It was small, tired, and in desperate need of care, but Keith saw something no one else would. He called Evan and described every detail: the bones of the structure, the neighborhood's energy, and the vision he had for it. By the time they finished talking, Evan was just as convinced as he was. That house became their first Detroit project. The renovation was anything but easy. Each day uncovered a new issue: rotted wood behind walls, outdated electrical wiring, plumbing that barely worked. But instead of backing down, they pushed harder. Keith poured his energy into design, blending modern touches with the home's original charm, while Evan tackled the construction problems with precision and patience. Within a month, the house was completely reborn. The once dark, crumbling rooms now felt bright and inviting. The kitchen was reimagined into a space that was both stylish and practical. Outside, fresh paint and thoughtful landscaping turned the house into something neighbors could finally feel proud of. When it sold for $64,000, the result was more than a financial win. It was proof that they had found the right formula. Creativity, resourcefulness, and determination could thrive in Detroit's market. That first flip lit a fire in both of them. They decided to take the leap, leaving behind their lives in Colorado to move fully into this new chapter. Starting over in Detroit wasn't simple. They were giving up the comfort of home, their friends, and everything familiar. But what they gained was a city filled with grit, history, and potential. Some streets had beautiful homes cared for with pride, while others had row after row of abandoned properties waiting for a second chance. The contrast was striking, but to Keith and Evan, it meant endless opportunity. As they settled in, they began shaping a style all their own, transformations that felt bold and beautiful, yet cost less than $45,000. They proved again and again that a home could be affordable without losing character or charm. Their work started catching the attention of people around the city, and soon someone bigger was watching. HGTV reached out, fascinated by the way the couple was bringing new life to Detroit without pushing out first-time buyers. The idea of turning their projects into a show was floated, and while Keith and Evan were intrigued, neither of them could have predicted just how much this next step would change everything. Bringing Detroit to the spotlight.
And fix one by one, and it's really easy for us both logistically but also on the business side when we can set our own comps.
By the time Keith and Evan had finished a handful of houses in Detroit, people around the city were already starting to talk about them. Their reputation grew quickly because they weren't doing the same thing everyone else was. They weren't chasing after big profits from luxury buyers or trying to create houses that looked like carbon copies of what you'd find in glossy magazines. Instead, their mission was simple and powerful: take forgotten homes, bring them back to life, and make them affordable for people buying for the very first time. This vision stood out, and word began to travel far beyond the blocks where they worked. Locals admired the way they poured heart into every home. The real estate community noticed how they managed to keep costs low while still producing houses that looked stunning and modern. And in the design world, people were vibing about Keith's signature touches: bright colors, painted art walls, surprising finishes, and one-of-a-kind furniture pieces. At the same time, Evan was proving himself as the steady problem solver, tackling everything from sagging beams to crumbling staircases. Together, their mix of creativity and precision became impossible to ignore. It wasn't long before their efforts caught the attention of HGTV. At the time, the network was looking for fresh faces and new ideas for home renovation shows, and Keith and Evan fit the bill perfectly. A producer reached out, intrigued by their story and the results of their work. The idea was simple but exciting. Follow the two of them as they bought abandoned houses in Detroit, fixed them up with modest budgets, and sold them to first-time buyers.
It is really crazy to think about that, especially after we were at Pride and you see like 1 million people at once, and that is really overwhelming. So the fact that 20 times that have seen the show is kind of overwhelming.
At first, Keith and Evan weren't sure. Neither of them had ever been in front of cameras before, and the thought of being filmed day after day was intimidating. They worried about whether they'd come across naturally and if the pressure would change the way they worked. But at the same time, they could see the opportunity. Television meant sharing their mission with a wider audience and shining a spotlight on Detroit's revival. The chance to inspire others and show that affordable housing could also be beautiful felt too important to pass up. Once they agreed, things moved quickly. HGTV developed the idea into a series called Bargain Block, a name that captured their mission to bring hope, affordability, and creativity back into neglected neighborhoods one house at a time. Filming began, and almost immediately the production team realized the magic they had found. Keith's lively, colorful personality shined on camera just as much as his design work did in the houses. He wasn't afraid to take risks, both in his style and in his storytelling. Evan, on the other hand, brought calm and stability to the screen, guiding projects through inevitable surprises with logic and patience. The balance between them was natural and authentic, and viewers could feel it. When Bargain Block premiered in April 2021, the response was massive. More than 20 million people tuned in during the first season, and audiences fell in love with both the transformations and the people behind them. Viewers weren't just watching walls get painted or cabinets installed, they were watching homes being rescued from ruin and given back to communities. Each house had its own personality because Keith never designed with a cookie-cutter approach. He hand-painted murals, built furniture from salvaged wood, and added touches that made each space unique. Meanwhile, Evan handled the less glamorous but equally important work by fixing foundations, rebuilding unsafe stairs, updating wiring, and making sure every home was safe and functional. These weren't the kinds of projects that usually got screen time on other shows, but they were part of what made Bargain Block different. The series wasn't about creating flawless showpieces. It was about building homes people could actually live in, with warmth, personality, and affordability. That authenticity is what struck a chord with viewers who were tired of watching renovation shows that all felt the same. The success of Bargain Block quickly cemented Keith and Evan as standout stars on HGTV. Their chemistry made them relatable, their work ethic made them admirable, and their sense of fun made them enjoyable to watch. Behind the cameras, though, life wasn't always as smooth as it looked on screen. With national recognition came more pressure, deadlines were tighter, the demand for bigger transformations grew, and the expectations of a huge audience added weight to every decision they made. But even with the stress, their partnership stayed strong. The trust and rhythm they had built since their early days in Colorado carried them through, and they continued to balance one another in ways that made their success possible. What began as two people experimenting with furniture and paint had now become a career that was touching millions. Their names were known across the country, and yet they never lost sight of why they started. Bargain Block wasn't just about flipping homes. It was about showing that style and affordability could go hand in hand, that neglected neighborhoods could be reborn, and that design didn't need to be reserved for the wealthy. Their journey also raised personal questions, ones that many fans were curious about. Despite their years together and the growing spotlight on their relationship, Keith and Evan remained engaged without ever taking the final step of marriage. To some, it was a mystery. To others, it was simply proof that they were charting their own course, both in life and in love, just as they always had in their work. And as their story continued, one thing was clear. The bond that held them together was as solid as the homes they rebuilt, and perhaps even more inspiring than the show that made them household names. Redefining commitment on their own terms, Keith Bynum and Evan Thomas had already built a full life together long before television fame came their way.
A lot of people across the country that still don't really understand what a gay relationship looks like.
Years of working side by side, fixing up houses, starting businesses, and making a home in a new city only made their relationship stronger. Yet no matter how much they accomplished, one question never seemed to fade. People constantly wanted to know when they would finally get married. Their response has always been steady, not anytime soon. Even though they have been engaged for years, setting a wedding date has never been a priority. It is not because their bond feels uncertain, but because they already see their life together as complete without a formal ceremony. In their hearts, marriage is something optional, not something they feel they must do. Keith has often shared that their decision is shaped by how busy their lives already are. Between filming for HGTV, juggling renovation projects, and growing new business ideas, their schedules are packed from start to finish. Adding wedding planning into the mix would only bring unnecessary stress. For them, time is more valuable when it is spent creating, working on what they love, or simply enjoying each other's company, rather than arranging an event just to meet outside expectations.
I don't want it to be an afterthought. I want to have the time to put it together like we want. I don't want it to be big or crazy, but I want it to be, memorable and special.
Evan has his own way of looking at it, one that fits neatly with Keith's view. For him, a certificate does not make their partnership more real. They already share a home, handle careers together, and face obstacles as a team. Emotionally, they already live as though they are married, bound by trust, respect, and common dreams. None of those things can be deepened by a piece of paper, and neither of them feels the need to prove their love through a ritual that the world expects. That does not mean marriage has never crossed their minds. At times, in playful conversations, they have laughed about how it could save them money when tax season arrives. Still, those small perks have never been enough to outweigh the freedom they feel from shaping their relationship in their own way. For them, the choice not to marry is also quietly symbolic. Both of them have lived through times when society did not make space for their love. Choosing to stay engaged without going through with a ceremony is their way of saying that love does not need to follow a traditional script to be genuine or lasting. This perspective has stirred different reactions. Many of their followers admire their confidence in living by their own rules, seeing it as an inspiring example of being true to themselves. Others still wait, hoping that one day the pair might surprise everyone with a wedding, maybe even in front of the cameras. But Keith and Evan appear happy with the life they already share. Their connection has not weakened without wedding vows. Instead, they continue to celebrate milestones in their own way, whether through a quiet anniversary dinner, a sudden weekend getaway, or the simple joy of finishing a tough renovation together. For them, the real bond is in the everyday moments that often go unnoticed. It is in sharing coffee before a long day of filming, or in whispered talks while reviewing design sketches late at night. It is in the satisfaction of standing back after weeks of effort and seeing a crumbling house turned into a home filled with life again. These are the moments that matter most to them, and they are the ones that give their relationship depth and meaning. Their story has become a reminder to many couples who feel pressured to follow the same old path. Keith and Evan show that love does not have to look like anyone else's version to be strong. The most lasting partnerships are not defined by public rituals, but by the daily choices of the people within them. Still, as their fame continues to grow, so does the public's curiosity. Viewers wonder if cameras might one day capture them walking down the aisle, but they do not seem bothered by the speculation. They move at their own pace, guided by the rhythm they have always trusted. Together they keep building a life anchored in teamwork, balance, and the freedom to decide what truly matters most to them. What many do not see is that this decision, like much of their journey, has been shaped by struggles and realities that taught them the value of authenticity. Their determination to live on their own terms, both in love and in work, did not come without battles. And those untold stories reveal why their bond today feels unshakable, facing discrimination and finding belonging. Keith Bynum and Evan Thomas may be known today for their style, talent, and warmth on screen, but their story was not built without pain. Long before Detroit and long before the fame of Bargain Block, both of them had to live through moments when being true to themselves came with a cost. Keith grew up in Texas, a place that gave him roots, but also quietly exposed him to prejudice. For years, he never felt direct rejection, not until he entered the construction world. That industry often carried a tough culture where jokes and small talk could cut deep. Comments thrown around carelessly and the cold silence from some coworkers were reminders that he was seen as someone who did not quite belong. When he finally decided to be open about who he was, the hardest blow did not come from strangers, but from his own family. Instead of receiving support, he was met with rejection. Being shut out by those he loved most left a scar he carried with him. Yet, that heartbreak also lit a fire inside him. He learned that family is not only the one you are born into, but also the one you create. He surrounded himself with people who lifted him up, people who embraced him without conditions. That choice became the foundation of his resilience. Evan faced his own set of struggles. His path through academics in South Dakota and Colorado may have looked different from Keith's, but it was not free of quiet judgments. In research and male-dominated fields, exclusion could come in subtle ways. The absence of welcome, the hidden assumptions, and the feeling of being the odd one out weighed heavily. Though less visible than open attacks, these experiences were isolating, but they also gave him a calm strength, a deep well of patience, and an empathy for anyone who felt the sting of not being fully accepted. When Keith and Evan began working together in renovation, those biases did not simply vanish. Construction trades carried long-standing cultural attitudes, and being an openly gay couple in that space meant they were met with doubt and at times resistance. They knew eyes were on them, some waiting for them to fail, but they also knew their work would be louder than any insult. Every detail they built, every house they transformed, carried proof that talent and craft speak beyond stereotypes. Everything began to shift when they moved to Detroit. From the start, they felt a different energy. The city's neighborhoods, filled with history and diversity, welcomed them in ways they had not felt before. Detroit's story of survival and rebirth mirrored their own determination. It was a place where individuality could breathe and difference was more often celebrated than silenced. In that environment, they found more than houses to flip. They found belonging. Neighbors opened their doors, clients valued their imagination, and local businesses became partners in their growth. This acceptance became fuel. It gave them freedom to pour more of themselves into their designs and more courage to use their voices for change. Through their show, they not only renovated homes, but also began pushing for inclusivity in an industry that too often excluded people like them. Their hiring choices were deliberate. They brought on workers from many different backgrounds, giving opportunities to those who rarely found open doors in construction. They made sure their team reflected the very diversity they wished had surrounded them earlier in life. At the same time, their presence on television carried meaning far beyond design. On screen, they stood as proof that identity does not define ability. For viewers who had never seen themselves represented in the home renovation world, Keith and Evan's visibility was a breath of fresh air. Their success showed that skill, creativity, and professionalism come in many forms, and that the old molds no longer hold power. Now, what do you think about bargain block cancellation? Do you think Keith and Evan will find another production company soon? Let's hear from you in the comments. Remember to hit the like button and subscribe. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.